we begin again with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And that is a very important statement for believing people to make. And when I say believing people, I'm including Christians, Jews, and other people who believe in the oneness of a creator and the oneness of the creatures that he has created. It's important that we begin each of our major movements with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. And that's just the Arabic way of saying that I begin with the name or the signature of God, the creator, the one God. And his attributes are the merciful benefactor and the merciful redeemer. And it's really that simple. It's actually a signature. The name or the word name can also be used as a signature. Just like when you go to the bank and you want to deposit some funds or withdraw some funds, they ask you to put your signature on a piece of paper because your signature is your permission. So when we say that we begin with the signature of Allah, we're actually saying that we begin with Allah's permission. You see how beautiful that is? And you're not going to ask Allah's permission for things that you know Allah has not approved, in the same way that you're not going to go into the bank as an employee of your company that has given you the trust to be able to deposit funds or to remove funds for the company's sake, for the company's benefit, for the company's usage. You're not going to go into the bank and forge a signature to say, my boss said, or the president of the company said to me, and he said, add a little something, something, even though it's not on the paper. You're not going to do that because you know you're not going to get away with that because you did not have your boss's permission to do that. So in that same manner, the things that you know that you do not have God's permission to do, you don't have God's permission to cheat on your spouse, you don't have God's permission to beat up on your children, you don't, or on your wife or whatever, you don't have God's permission to cheat people, to lie to people, all of the things that our scriptures tell us that we're not supposed to do as believing people. We know we're not going to get God's permission to do that, so we're not going to begin those actions with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. We're not going to begin it seeking Allah's signature or seeking Allah's permission to do anything that Allah has not condoned. And that behavior is to be standard among people who say they believe in a creator and the last day, meaning the day of consequence. They're not going to do that because they're not only believing that there's a creator who created them from the beginning, they also believe that in the end of things, in the conclusions of things, whether that conclusion be your physical lifespan and you die, as all of us will, from any number of things, or whether that conclusion be the final wrap up of this total system, this total universe, and the shutting down of the universe and the creation of maybe another universe, just like this. Allah says it's easy for him to do that. We don't know what that conclusion entails. We don't know what it's going to look like, what it's going to bring, what it's going to sound like. We don't have any of that knowledge. The only knowledge we have is that one day this biological existence will be muted out. And we want to be ready for that. So we try our best, our level best, to do only those actions which we know would gain the permission of God. And it's really that simple. So that's a wonderful way of explaining the Basmala. It's called the Basmala. And I'd just like to say a couple of words about the word Salam, which Muslims are known to use, which Christians used to be known in history for using, because it's all throughout the New Testament that Jesus, when he greeted his followers and when he greeted even strangers, he would greet them with peace. He would say, peace be upon you. That's in the English translations of the Bible. Peace be upon you. And there were even instances where Jesus, in his humility before his God, before his Lord, he would actually put his forehead on the ground and pray. That's pretty much what Muslims do, isn't it? It's called a sajda. And Jesus is known to have made sajda. That's in the Bible. So these are things that Christians need to consider, because these are things that bring Christians and Muslims into the same circle of recognition when it comes to who God is and what God actually desires of us. God desires our fullest commitment. He desires an entire submission. And by entire, we simply mean that every aspect of our lives is to be lived out in recognition, conscious recognition of what pleases God, of what God would sign off on, what God would give his signature to. So if you take that to the 10th power, let your brain register that. Taking that type of consciousness, that level of consciousness to the 10th power means that you do not open your mouth to say anything to anybody, including your own self, unless you first run it through the ringer of what God would be pleased with. So this way, if we're getting hot and angry, if we know we're about to say something to somebody, even close to us, people we've known for years, or we might have a temper tantrum around or whatever, or an emotional outburst or whatever. Okay, you're a human being. You're going to do that. We're going to do that. But let us immediately send that upstairs to the coat check room and say, well, I can't go home with this on. Or I can't stay in the meeting with all of this burden on me. Let me check this emotion. Let me check these words, or let me go back and apologize for what I just said. And that apology might be the very thing to get your big toe, at least, into Jannah, into the paradise. And if your big toe gets in, there's a very good chance that the rest of that foot, that leg, and the rest of the body up to the torso, the neck, and then the head will also join you in paradise. And that's what we want. That's what we want. And it's really that simple. Dear learners, I will need you to be very patient with the information I will be providing for you this evening. And this is not intended as a medical diagnosis of any kind, of any sort, or as the cure for your anxiety. You should consult a medical provider or a therapist in cases where those professions are needed. So if you're really going through something because of this outbreak and this fear that is in the air, they had that in a song, I believe, called Ball of Confusion by the Temptations. Fear in the air. Huh? Yeah. Tension everywhere. Unemployment rising fast. The Beatles' new records of gas. Right? So we've been here before. Not at this magnitude, but we've been here before. The world has been here many, many times before. There have been countless plagues in human history. Many of them in modern history, the bubonic plague and other kinds of plagues. All right. So this is not something that humans are disfamiliar with. We've been here. We've been down this road. We've had to deal with this. We're hundreds and thousands and sometimes millions of people at a time have died because of the spreading of diseases that were not compatible with the human cellular system. So in order to combat this, we have to come into at least a cursory knowledge of the human cellular system. You have to become more interested in the sciences that support health than you have been. You personally have to take on or pledge to look into these things for yourself, not to get a degree in it, but just to have a degree of intelligence regarding it so that you'll know what to say and, more importantly, what to do in the event you or someone close to you becomes victimized by this particular circumstance. And we pray to Allah that none of us are victims. Any ones of us who have family members who are victims, and I know there are some of us who do. We have people close to us who are reportedly in the hospital due to the coronavirus outbreak and et cetera. And many of them have already had previously compromised immune systems. That's an important note for you to register. And we just ask Allah that we do the right thing by ourselves, by our own conscience, and that we not kowtow to the fear mongering that's taking place, particularly through media right now. So again, be patient, pay attention. My intent is to provide Quranic remedies for issues above and beyond our biological needs. So I'm not here to be your doctor. I'm here to give you Quranic messages that are intended to remedy situations taking place in that which is actually higher and more substantial than your biology. Some of us may already be in a wheelchair, or, some of us are elderly and we're not getting around like we used to. That's the biology. But those same people may very well be carrying spirits that can outrun, outrace, and outpace those who are many years younger than they. So we're not dealing with just the biology. The biology comes and goes. It's the spiritual life that we're talking about paying more attention to. And it's the spiritual life that the Quran is primarily addressing. The Quran was revealed in order to address the human being as a multifaceted, multi-layered creation whose properties are connected to the physical, emotional, intellectual, spiritual, and cosmic realms of existence. See, we exist on all of those layers and within all of those levels. And the Quran is addressing all of them. Therefore, sit tight, put on your thinking caps, tighten your seatbelts, and have paper and pen in hand. As usual, I will not be allowing any questions or comments during the address. Please comment in the chat room if you have any questions, and those will only be answered after I have concluded my presentation. Now, let's go over very quickly again what was said last night concerning the consonants Qaf and Ra. Qaf and Ra. And let me say, for those who may be listening for the first time and did not catch yesterday, we are dealing with the Arabic letters Qaf, Ra, Nun. The Q sound, the R sound, and the N sound. And we're going to be relating that to the English word corona. Actually, it's a Latin word, corona. And the word corona, C-O-R-O-N-A, is the Latin word for crown, C-R-O-W-N. And you can see in the word crown that there's the C, the R, and the N as consonants. And in the word corona, we have exactly the same consonants. The sound of Q in Arabic, Qaf, and the sound of K in Arabic, Kaf, are from the same part of the mouth. They're from the back of the throat, and they are called the gutturals. Gutturals, all right? And the letter H is also a guttural. And wherever you find letters that emanate from the same parts of the mouth, those letters can be interchanged in words, because they are essentially the same sounds. Qaf and Kaf and Ha are from the same part of the mouth, the back of the throat, called the guttural. So you can interchange them. So the wisdom I just dropped on you allows you to look at the word qarun, which is a Quranic word. Qurun, another Quranic word with a different meaning. I could substitute that K sound or that Q sound now for an H, and that becomes Harun. That's the brother of Moses or Musa in the Quran. And we can go on and on. If I asked you to do some real serious research into those consonantal connections, you'll be able to bring me multiple words. In fact, you should be doing that on your own anyway. You should be able to bring me multiple words based on these consonantal connections. So we're beginning with the letters Qaf, Ra. And the consonants Qaf, Ra refers to anything which can be collected, picked up, and carried to a central location. Qaf means to collect in the back. To collect in the back. And Ra means to bring forward to a front area. as parts of the body, they represent the subconscious mind, qaf, and the conscious mind, ra. The subconscious mind, qaf, and the conscious mind, ra. The act of bringing information out of the subconscious into the conscious is now known as reading. That's what we call it. Bringing information from the back of the head, so to speak, the subconscious mind, the subconscious part of the brain, forward to the conscious part of the brain, the frontal lobes in the neocortex. When we do that with information, it's called reading, because you cannot read until you first have information stored or memorized in the subconscious part of the brain. You call on that. You already know your alphabet. And someone says, read this book. You look at the book, you see the alphabet that are being given, and your subconscious mind gives you the reading. It says, this is the word to and go and store and so forth. And this is how we read. If you do not have information or letters stored in the back of your mind and your subconscious, you will not be able to read. You see? One of the words for read in Arabic is ikra, and you can clearly see the qaf ra in ikra. Before humans learned to read academically, this same act of bringing information forward out of the subconscious mind was called remembering. So before humanity or human beings learned to read technically or academically, human beings, the reading that we were doing as humans was called remembering. And the Quranic word for that is dhikr. And you can see the KR in dhikr. It's equivalent to the QR. And it means the same thing: to gather, to collect, and to bring to a central place. Dhikr. One of the names for the Quran itself is ad-dhikr, the remembrance. The letters qaf and kaf are interchangeable gutturals, as we mentioned. When we mentally reassemble the details of a given experience, we are remembering. In other words, we are bringing members back together again. Re means to do a thing repeatedly, and member, you know what a member is. If you're the member of a family group or a member of a club or, something like that, you are a member. And we can break that word down even further if we break it up after the mem. Mem is a letter in both Hebrew and Arabic. In Hebrew, it's called mem. In Arabic, it's called meme. And interestingly enough, one of the modern day terms being bandied around a whole lot is called meme. Social memes, memes. If you don't think they're getting this from the Quran, you're sorely mistaken. They're not dreaming this stuff up. They're going to God's guidance for even their practical wisdom. So remembering, remember. And mem as a letter in Hebrew means exactly the same thing as the letter meme in the Arabic letter system. They both have to do with water. They both have to do with the agitation in water. So it's not still water. Mem and meme are not referring to still water or quiet water, or as Gladys Knight and the Pips told us, peaceful waters. That's not what the mem is. Mem is when the water becomes turbulent, when it becomes pushed against the rocks by the winds. You know that. When the ocean begins to swell or to get swole, and water begins to hit upside your little boat, your little canoe, and it makes you fearful. It makes you careful about the very next move that you're going to make so that you don't become capsized in the water. That's what the letter mem and meme mean. So that kind of agitation in the water causes the person to become very careful about their movements. Because of the connection to the idea of being very careful about your movements, because you're not on solid ground, that letter also eventually came to be connected to the idea of a moral decisions, moral thinking. We're getting these extensive meanings from hints and clues that were left for us by Imam Warithuddin Muhammad. I'm guessing that everyone on this line has at least heard of him, if not been a part of his community. And you should still be a part of his community, because his community is not captured within a physical body that died in 2008. Imam W.D. Muhammad is more of a language than he is a biology. And that language is in the world, was born into the world officially in 1975, February of 1975. And believe it or not, that language has been growing stronger and stronger and stronger in the world, fortifying people's commitment to moral duty, to moral and rational thinking. That's what meme is. So now people are more careful. Even the diehard racist is more careful about what he says in public or in front of the media or whatever. See, because his moral mind, although the water is filthy, the moral mind is still active in him. And that's where the world has, that's the point that the entire world has reached. So what we are experiencing now as a worldwide emergency is going to pan out to be totally different than those epidemics, those pandemics, those tragedies, those panic moments of the past, even the recent past, because this water content, this being conscious, water also represents consciousness. You know, this being conscious, when we talk about having a clear conscience, that's what we're saying, that the water is clean. The water is palatable. I've thought about this so much, and I've checked and double checked my point of view on this subject. And I believe that it's the cleanest, purest position that I could take in regards to this issue. See, that's how your moral mind is supposed to operate. It's not supposed to be considerate of what favors you personally. The Quran says, be a people standing for justice, even though it be against yourselves or your nearest of kin. And then it gives a whole list of people that you should be just towards, without consideration for bloodlines or blood ties, without consideration for how much wealth you have and you got to stick with your wealth group. Or because you poor, you can only follow the people who are poor like you. Yeah. No, Allah says practice justice, irregardless of those categories that human beings fall into and even sometimes invent, like nationalities. Those are invented. Nationalities are not something created in the fitrah. There are no animal nationalities. There are only human borders. There are no animal countries as such. You don't go to Alaska and find polar bears who are committed to Alaskan nationality, or wherever they're from. I don't remember where polar bears are from, but you understand what I'm saying. That you don't fly, you don't take a plane and fly over the United States of America and look down and see the words US of A on the land. All of the land is just the land. And it's the human intellect that begins to invent and fabricate and make these dissections and these divisions in things that the creation itself does not support or does not promote. We do it for convenience sake. We divide things up for convenience sake. You know, just like we divide our socks into the white socks, the black socks, the dress socks, but they're all socks. But for the mind's convenience and the mind's peace of mind, we make these divisions, and people do the same thing as human beings. But we just have to learn to make divisions that are not supportive of evil. Don't make divisions in skin colors and gender types and, geographical traits and types and phenotypes and that kind of thing. Don't make those kinds of divisions. That's where you become a transgressor against the fitrah. And in becoming a transgressor against nature, you actually become a transgressor against God. And you become what the Quran calls a kafir, a coverer. The English word cover comes from the Arabic word kafir. F and V are interchangeable in linguistics. So cover, C-O-V-E-R, is kafir, K-A-F-I-R. All right? So kafirs, we call them disbelievers, but that's not as close a meaning as what I'm giving you now. They are coverers of something. Of what? They are coverers of nature, coverers of the fitrah process created by God, coverers of the truth that has been established, that there's a creator over this creation. They cover up all of that because they want your attention to go to them as lords, as patrons and gods. And that's where they earn the wrath that eventually visits them. Believe it or not, in this modern day situation we're dealing with now, that wrath is very evident. The wrath of God I'm speaking about is very evident in this current day situation. And all you have to do is maintain your cool and your presence of mind, and don't give in to the hype. Hype. H-Y-P-E. That's a word that actually comes from a larger word called hyperbole. H-Y-P-E-R-B-O-L-E. And if I were to break that down consonantally, I could show you how it's consonantally related to the Quranic word Iblis. Hyperbole. The consonants officially are the P, the R, the L. You might add the H, but it's technically not important in this word. What are important are the hard consonants of P, R, L in hyper, and the B, pardon me. But the B and P are interchangeable. So if you look at the word Iblis, it has the B, the L, and the S. B, L, S. Hyperbole is P, B, R, and L. I believe I'm getting that correct. Okay? Hyperbole is when you exaggerate a thing. When a thing becomes exaggerated. And the letters B and L by themselves represent exaggeration, or something that is brought from one point into another point, or across to another point. It's like an exaggerated movement. If I move from this side of the bridge and carry something to the other side of the bridge, it's considered poetically as exaggeration, because I'm taking from this point and I'm bringing extra with me over to the other side. So words that have the BL connection and words that have the BR connection are always going to be involving the taking from one place and the filling up of a secondary place. Going a little bit slower so you'll catch this. So in the English word bring, you have BR. You take it from this place, say, bring this to your brother. Okay, well, when you leave this space, it's no longer here. When you arrive at the other space, it now is over there, right? If you look at the word barakat, which means a blessing, you see the BL in blessing, you see the BR in barakat, and R and L are interchangeable, as you know, right? So it means what? To bring from this end, take something from this end, and when it gets to the other end, it's going to become multiplied. That's what barakat means. It means that if you do what you're supposed to do, Allah, at the end of it all, is going to not only give you an equal blessing, but he's going to multiply those blessings. All right? So these are, just hints in the language. I'm going to revisit that connection between Iblis and hyperbole. I may have misspoken on that. There was another word that I was reaching for, and it just didn't come to me at that point. Maybe it'll come to me before we're finished. But the idea is that the B and the L in and of itself represents that kind of expansion. And the other hint in the Quran regarding Iblis with his BL connection is that he says that Allah says about him that he became astakbaru. You see the B and the R in astakbaru from kabara, kabir. He became, in his own estimation, bigger or greater than he actually was. They call that hype. And I believe that's the connection I was looking for. That's hyperbole. The way he spoke was hyperbole. I'm going to come from before them and from behind them and from their right and from their left. And by the time I get finished, and he's talking to Allah. But it was hype. See, it was hype. And they passed that same hype down to us through the generations. And most of that hype came through the culture and through a movement that came to be known as hip hop. Hip hop are just code words for hype music. Music that when you listen to the lyrics, the people who are telling you about themselves are really just exaggerating on the most part. At least they were when it began. When it began, Run DMC and all these guys were middle class family people from Queens. They weren't the gangsters that hip hop came to be when gangsterism entered the fold of hip hop. And when the people who began performing hip hop became actual or were from actual gangster situations, when you get to your 50 Cent and these other guys who were actually criminals under your Jay-Z's, and these were actual criminals on the street. So look at what happened to hip hop. By virtue of the hyperbole, by virtue of the exaggerated words that were being spoken as spells, they were actually able to talk a thing into existence. Now, a lot of your hip hop artists are in and out of prison, and some of them ending up dead on the sidewalk. Why? Because they spoke these things into existence. It's a science that the people, the social engineers who run this world, the social engineers who are actually running this current situation with the virus, they understand this science. They understand this psychology. They understand the principle of a magic that's being used over the minds of ignorant, or we might even say dumbed down people. They understand this science. It's called hyperbole, and in their language of the magic, it's called the abracadabra. And abracadabra are Hebrew words. Abra means I speak, and I speak clearly what I want. And kadabra means I bring it from death into life. I speak, therefore I create, is the way it's translated sometimes also. Abra are the same consonants that give you the Arabic word Arab. Arab. In Arabia, that's a speaking, isn't it? And it's a speaking that is clear. It's clear knowledge. Because the Arabic language is connected to the fitrah when you understand it in principle, and when you understand that each word, each letter has a meaning, not just the words, not just the root words, but each letter in the Arabic system has a meaning. Just like in the Hebrew language, each letter has a meaning. Just like in the Chinese language, each letter, hundreds of them in Chinese, each one of those letters is a pictograph. It's a picture of something, and it has a meaning. So Arab and Abra basically mean the same thing. I am speaking something clearly in my mind, in my actions, and the more I speak it, even though it doesn't currently exist, it will come into existence. It's their way of playing God. As Allah says in the Quran, when he desires a thing, he simply says, kun fayakun, be, and it becomes. So they're practicing that same magic on the human level by saying abra, kadabra. Kadabra is related to cadaver, a dead body. They're saying if the situation is dormant, if there's something that is not activated yet, It's still dead in the world. This plan I'm talking about, this scheme of ours. All we have to do is start talking about it. I told you, remember, Muhammad said he doesn't talk, right? They start talking, just talking about it, putting words and phrases and things into the atmosphere for you to repeat. That's why I call it the dumb down process. Because as the dummies, we are so quick to take what we're hearing through social media and through the culture and through the music and all of that and through the jokes, the nasty jokes that are now being told by the most vilest of comedians. Most of these new comedians are the absolute enemies of social progress because they make everything a joke. And Imam Muhammad told us one time that Satan is now working through jokes, because a joke makes your brain relax its guard. And if they can get you to laugh at something serious, man, they can sell you just about any idea. And that's what they've been working on for the past 2 decades, at least in the American society. But they've been importing jokesters and comedians from all over the world. You notice you got Chinese comedians and Indian, a whole lot of from India, comedians. Used to be just Richard Pryor and Red Fox and, a couple of them on our side. But now we have so many African American, the women became comedians and became more vulgar than the men. European comedian can't get a break now unless he decides, but I got a cuss and fuss like they are. So they got Jay Black and whoever, these other European American comedians, they have to become vulgar just to get your attention now, because that is the way they have led the cattle and the sheeple to the slaughter with. That's the way they've led us to the slaughter with. So we have to consciously decide that we are not going to participate in their dumbing down process. The dumbing down process is given to us in the Quran in the statement from the angels to God. Are you going to create one who's going to make mischief and shed the blood? You see? Look at the order though. Not just shed the blood. Create mischief. So what you should be doing in this time of crisis, quote unquote, is looking for whether there was any mischief taking place prior to this social reconditioning, what they call the social distancing program. Social distancing is the shedding of blood. Blood is what makes you social, beginning with you sharing blood with your family. That's your immediate social group, your family, your immediate family. When it broadens out, it becomes your nationalistic or your tribal family. And you're still related by blood. And if you're not related by blood in the tribe, you're related by commitment to certain principles and ideals. So blood transfers from the physical idea of blood running through your veins, having the same DNA, etc. And it transfers and becomes a higher idea when you talk about principles that you have in common. So Americans are related as Americans, although not by DNA in all cases. So blood is symbolic of the social nature, social interaction. That was another nugget that was given to us by Imam W.D. Muhammad. Blood represents the social nature. All right? Think about that. So I know I'm taking time in the beginning of this, but I'm reacquainting you with your inheritance. That's all I'm doing. Reacquainting you with what was left for you by Imam W.D. Muhammad and others. I'm reacquainting some of you with what your mama left you and you didn't respect it when she gave it to you because you didn't know how valuable it was. So we have to revisit information from time to time and remember. So keep the waters of your moral nature churning at all times. When people come to you with something to do or something to believe in, let your moral mind begin to wash it back and forth. See if there's any filth on it. See if there's any contaminants in it before you accept it. You do that if you were drinking a glass of water. You'd look in it, make sure that if there was just a speck, you might not drink it. So I don't know what is this, an eyelash? I mean, what is this? Somebody been drinking his water? I don't want it if somebody else's lips and saliva's been in this thing. Well, if you're that meticulous with a glass of drinking water, how much more careful should you be when people offer you moral guidance that's not clean or correct? All right, let's get to the crown. Uneasy is the head that wears the crown. So the letters Qaf, Ra, Nun give us the verb qarana, and qarana means to join one thing with another, to couple. It represents a generation, but keep in mind it's a generation that's connected to another generation. All right? Now, the coronavirus is a virus that's been around for probably thousands of years. People don't understand that. They don't know that. It's not new. It didn't happen in 2019, and that's why they call it corona. COVID-19. All right? That's not what that is. The coronavirus, that name is on the back of your Lysol from 30 years ago. Fights coronavirus. So it's not new. But what we have now is a super generational version of coronavirus. So what it was technically and chemically 5 years ago, it has ramped and amped itself up like all diseases do. Diseases become resistant to treatment, and then they have to step up. The chemists and the scientists and the pharmaceutical people have to actually ramp up the antidote for these diseases, because diseases are living entities. Humans are not, and the animals are not the only living entity. We have microscopic living entities. Right now, we have all manner of insects that live in our skin, on our skin. You've probably been told that. And you could be stepping fresh out of the shower, thinking that you are squeaky clean. But if we were to put one of those super magnifying glasses up to your skin, you would see microscopic insects living in your skin. They live there. There's nothing you can do about it. Microbes and other things, these are living creatures in your skin. And that might make your skin crawl, but that lets you know how magnificent Allah is when He says He's Ar-Rahman. He's the caretaker for all creation, and He's providing mercy and benefits for all. Ar-Rahman means that there's nobody that gets left out, not Adolf Hitler, not anybody, not President Trump. Nobody gets left out of Allah's giving of mercy and distributing of mercy. It's just that if you keep doing the wrong thing, the outcome down the line at the end of the tunnel is going to be bad for you, because there will be no excuse for you having done all of the wrong things in light of all of the mercy that Allah has shown you. So the ones receiving mercy in the end are only going to be those who qualified for the mercy. That's the Ar-Rahim. They'll be forgiven. There will be mercy and forgiveness and redemption, right? For those who were attempting their best to do the right thing. Be mindful of these things. So here we're dealing with an idea of something that is generationally passed down. Just like a king will have a son who's now the prince, and the authority of the king, the crown, the authority, that authority will be passed down generationally to his son. And when the father dies or retires, that crown and that authority and that power to say yay or nay to even life and death for people will go to the son, the former prince. He'll be the new king. See? So wherever you find these three categories of consonants in whatever words they appear in, they're going to have as a theme that which can be passed down generationally. Trust me when I tell you that, but you need to investigate that for yourself. I'm not going to do all of your homework for you. Let's continue. And I told you also that the English word horn, you see it here? This is a dictionary, horn. That H is a guttural, the R is a liquid, the N is a nasal, and it equals the qaf here, that's a guttural, the ra here, you see the R, the liquid, and the noon here, that's the nasal. So qaf ra noon is also ha ra na, which gives us the English word horn. It doesn't matter what the language is, if they correspond to these consonantal connections, they're going to have related themes. You see how corn is able to grow and multiply, take over your field, and then the season comes in that doesn't support that, and then as soon as the season that supports the growth of corn comes back, there it goes. It keeps returning generationally. I'm saying corn because I'm replacing now this H with the C, the other guttural C. But the horn is the same. It's the same. And the horn is known to repeat its sounds, the trumpeter, etc. Right? You're not going to find a horn that's just going to blow one note and sit down and expect applause. No, the horn has to give you repeated sounds. And the horn is a commanding instrument. It commands your attention. Could be a flugelhorn or something very soft, but normally if we're talking about a trumpet, as this is talking about, you'll see it here on the left, then you're talking about something that's a, you know, that, oh, wake up, what's going on? Oh, somebody's in charge here. The king is coming. That's what's happening. The king is about to arrive. So they have loose connections. Some of them have direct connections. Some of them have implied connections. But that's how language is. Let's continue. Then we spoke about Qarun in the Quran, known as Korah in the Bible. And he was fabulously rich and stood high in favor of Pharaoh. So he was a Pharaoh. He's a separate Pharaoh or Fir'aun all to himself in history. And he's spoken of in the Quran as having keys so magnificent to his kingdom that it took so many strong men to carry his keys. Just the keys to the wealth of his kingdom. He was a bad dude, this Qarun, right? So the implications related to collecting and carrying are implied in the act of generation, because we are collecting our seeds as men, sperm. They are collected in our testicles, as I mentioned yesterday, and they are then deposited in the female, who then carries them. And if she becomes pregnant, if she doesn't become pregnant, those sperm die off. If she becomes pregnant by one of them, then she begins to carry that developing life, and we call it pregnancy. And then that pregnancy is eventually delivered and brought into one place called the home, or the basket, or, bassinet, or whatever you call it, right? All right. So we don't have to go through all of this. I just gave you that. The English word crown also implies the joining together, sometimes of a king and a queen in rulership over a nation or over a country, or very often the joining together of neighboring powers. This happened between ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. They formed a united union about 6,000 to 7,000 years ago in Egypt and in Greece. And they stopped fighting each other, realizing that if we combined our powers, we wouldn't have to fight each other. We could go conquer the world. In other words, we could use this collection of power and use it to colonize every other nation weaker than us that was in our sight. And that's exactly what they did. They were so successful at it that Imam Muhammad made the statement that if you want to know what America is, it's merely the combination of the concepts out of ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. Everywhere you look, every major thing America has done, she's inherited it from ancient Egypt and ancient Greece. You see what we mean now about how the Qur'an is generational? Think about that. The important thing for thinkers is to be thoroughly aware of the language being used, particularly in the media. I also mentioned to you yesterday that the word media is from an ancient city called Media, amongst the people called the Medes, M-E-D-E-S. And the word media as well as the word medicine are from this ancient people, this ancient city and this ancient people. And these people lived between Western and Northern Iran, and they specialized in magic and spell casting. The religion was a part of ancient Iran's Mithra worship, Mithraic or Mithra worship. Mithra was a myth that gave us the sun, the sun, as the symbol of its god. All right. It was one of the original religions dedicated to sun worship. This was before they gave us Christianity that was dedicated to son worship. But the son in Christianity is merely a spin-off from older religions and mythologies that practiced sun worship. Jesus says in the Bible, I am the light of the world. What do you think that means? And he said, for as long as I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. If that's not the sun, you tell me what it is. When the sun goes out, it takes the light with it. All right. So in Mithra worship, there was a priesthood that was known as the Magi, M-A-G-I, the Magi. And from the word Magi, we get the word magic. Now, if you read the New Testament of the Bible carefully, it's going to tell you that when Jesus was born, there were 3 so-called wise men that visited Mary and the baby Jesus. And they are called Magi. They are from ancient Iran, called Persia. They practiced a religion called Zoroastrianism. And Zoroastrianism was dedicated to fire worship. You know why? Because of the sun. You'd be surprised, dear Muslims, at how much influence from the religion of Zoroaster, how much of that fire worship influence has entered the theology circle of Muslims and so-called Islam. This happened in history when the Muslims who were under Muhammad the Prophet left Medina and went on to conquer Persia. They went into Persia. They battled with the Persians, keeping in mind that these people had been ruling with their religion, Zoroastrianism, for several thousand years before the Muslims even knew they were Muslims. They were scientists. They had sciences. They had a structure, political structures, etc. And the Muslims came with their fervor to conquer Persia and, in a sense, force them to become Muslims, which was what the Prophet did not instruct them to do. There's no instruction in the Quran for you to go and force anybody to become what you are. La ikraha fid din. There is no compelling in this deen. That's Allah speaking, not the Prophet. That's Allah speaking, and that's not a hadith. The hadith will show you that Muhammad did say, go conquer these people, put these people under your foot, enslave these women. All of these crazy hadiths will tell you that, but there's nothing in the Quran. It's a very simple statement. La ikraha fitin. You see, in ikraha, there's the KR sound. That means let there be no gathering of people, bringing them to your central point and forcing them to be what you are. There's no forcing, no compelling. It has to be a free will commitment to live the Muslim life. And we'll talk more about that because even the term Muslim is a term that was used many, many, many years after the passing of the Prophet. The early followers of Muhammad were not popularly called Muslim. Muslim was more something that you did more than what it was you were. You might say, well, it's a noun. Well, so is Al-Islam. But it's not something, it's not a person because it's a noun. Nouns, so you have to understand this about the Arabic language. When the Arabic language gives you a noun, it's giving you something permanent as a behavior. And that permanent can be in you as a noun, as a person who does what you do often and repeatedly and so forth, or it can be in an activity that you are responding to. If it's given as a verb is an action word, but it's limited by its own nature because actions have a beginning and a conclusion. So when Allah is using verbs in the Quran, he's describing behaviors and activities that have a conclusion attached to them. But when he's describing a noun, al-ula wal-akhirah, those are nouns. They're describing the former and the latter. But what Allah is saying is that the former exists for all times. And the latter, when it gets here, will also be something that exists for a long time. So it has nothing to do with you being a person, place, or thing as such. In Arabic, a noun is also an idea. It's only in English that we say person, place, or thing for a noun. In Arabic and Hebrew and these other Semitic languages, a noun is a person, a place, a thing, or an idea. So being a Muslim is actually more of an idea because it's related to your behavioral patterns. And do not die except in this behavioral pattern. And that behavioral pattern has nothing to do with words uttered like abracadabra or like la ilaha illallah Muhammad or Rasulullah. That utterance, that shahadatain as they call it, is nowhere to be found in that combination in the Quran. Somebody gave an illegitimate marriage to those two statements. Allah never condoned it. Allah never puts in the Quran anything or anybody in the same presence with him when he's talking about his authority as creator, de facto. You might say, well, he mentions Allah and his messenger. Yeah, but not as an object to be worshipped. You might say, but he means that there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is the human. That's the human. You know, he's the human. Well, your brain knows that if it keeps hearing that, it's going to begin to associate that human with God qualities because it's always given in the same context. You do not understand human psychology and circuitry in the brain, what the brain does in order to make associations so that it can better understand the guidance that's being given to it. We don't study on that level. That's the level that we have to move up to. So you might say, well, then what were they calling themselves, instructor? They were calling themselves mu'min. The earliest Muslims under Muhammad, in all of the inscriptions that have been found, they never found the term Muslim. That happened several hundred years later and in a different part of Arabia. It happened in northern Arabia under a different leadership body. That body went on to produce the Sassanid Empire, the Umayyad Empire, followed by the Sassanids. They were enemies of each other, and both were calling themselves Muslims. That should tell you right there that something was rotten in Denmark as far as their thinking went. You say you believe the same thing? And you develop empires, meaning you took over large properties and territories. And one says Umayyad, and that's correct. And then you come behind that and you say, well, we want what you got. We're going to fight you to take the dunya that you have. We're not going to share as Muslims or as mu'min. We're going to gank you for that. And then they started fighting each other, and you got all of these wars, and all of it culminated in what came to be the movement of Muslims, quote unquote, in the regions of Turkey, the country of Turkey. Constantinople, it was called then. Instructor Bilal knows his history, trying to share some of this with you. Stop being Friday Muslims. Graduate to become mu'min. That's the objective. There's a whole surah on being a mu'min. Yeah, a whole surah called Al-Mu'minun. There's no surah called Al-Muslimun. It's a term, but there's no surah. Allah speaks about those who have accepted Islam. He speaks about that as not being quite enough. He said, it's a start, but it's not enough to just say aslama, that I have submitted. You have to do more than that, is the point. You have to become firmly committed to the knowledge body that regulates your life as a submitting or a submitter. So it's not enough to just say La ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulullah. And there's no requirement on your part to say those two things back to back. The only requirement is to acknowledge that there is no, and in fact, La ilaha illallah, if you'll give me just a moment to explain these very important things in our deen, La ilaha illallah has been mistranslated as no God but God or no God but Allah. That's not what that statement means. If the statement had said La ilahun illallah, then it would be no God. Ilahun is a noun and it means that which is given attention, a thing or an idea or a noun, person, place, a thing. So in that sense, yes, there's no God except the God. I get it. But Allah is saying more than that. Allah is saying that there is another, ilaha is a verb. It's an action word. And it means the action of giving something else the kind of attention that you would give to Allah.